Hello, welcome back to another video all about sapphic books. Sapphic books, queer books on this channel? Really? Of course, that's what I do here. Hi, I'm Georgia. I talk about queer books on the internet, or at least I talk about queer books on this channel. And about 2 years ago, I filmed a video where I spoke about my top 10 WLW, women loving women, sapphic books. And I figured it's about time that I updated that list. Only I didn't want to just slot in new books into that top 10 because I figured you can go and watch that video and hear about all of those books. So this is like an extra top 10 new books I didn't mention in that last video that I really want to talk about today, because in the last couple of years I have read so many really good sapphic books that I want to talk to you about. And yes, you may have noticed I have become one of those mini mic twats. Hello, here is my mini mic. I really like it. I like having something in my hand to play with whilst I talk about books. I feel like it makes me more natural. I'm still playing around with the audio on this, so if the audio is a little bit dodgy, hopefully it won't be, but if it is, bear with me. I'm still working it all out, but yeah, I like this mic. It's really good. I'll link it down below in case anyone's looking for a mini mic. But yeah, with that, let's talk about my top 10 sapphic books that I've read in the last couple of years. This is in no particular order, by the way. These are just 10 books I really enjoyed. I do have a favourite. I'll tell you what that favourite is when we come to it. But we are going to start with this one, potentially controversial. This is Diette by Jenny Fran Davis. And this has terrible reviews on Goodreads. This is literally I think it's 2.85 stars on Goodreads or 2.95 stars. And I understand, I really deeply understand why some people might really hate this book. But I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to tell you why. So this is very much a weird girl book. I still am not entirely sure that I understood what was happening in this book, if I'm being completely honest. But all I know is I really enjoyed the vibes. And I think about it all the time, and for me, if I still think about a book 6 months after I've read it, that is a sign that a book was really good, or at least it captured my attention. I read a lot of books. I have to. It's part of my job here, but also I just really enjoy reading. It's what I do in my spare time. So if a book sticks in my brain, that says something. And this book, it is it's buried its way deep inside there. So our main character in Diette is Sasha, and she is fundamentally just this deeply unlikable person, or at least I thought that she was deeply unlikable. And this entire book is through her point of view, so it's a very unreliable narrator. But Sasha has got this boyfriend / girlfriend, Jessie. It's never made entirely clear in this book what Jessie's gender identity is, or was it? Maybe that was covered towards the end of the book. I can't really remember. But Jessie, I would describe maybe as genderqueer. At some points, Jessie is referred to as boyfriend. Some points, Jessie is girlfriend. All sorts of pronouns. Just very fluid. Gender fluid, perhaps. Sasha and Jessie don't have the most healthy relationship. I'd actually probably describe their relationship as very unhealthy. But they have been invited on a couples weekend with this older lesbian couple that they know called Jules and Miranda, as well as Jessie's best friend Lou and Lou's girlfriend Darcy. And Sasha hates Darcy, really does not like Darcy at all. Sasha thinks Darcy's this terrible person, but it's never entirely clear whether Darcy is actually as awful as Sasha thinks she is, because obviously it's through Sasha's point of view. You don't actually know what Darcy's like. Is Sasha just reading into Darcy's actions from a negative standpoint because she doesn't like her, and she's a bit jealous of her because Darcy is this super cool it girl, and Sasha tries so hard to be cool and she just isn't. So you've got Sasha and Darcy's weird dynamic. You've also got Jules and Miranda, who Jessie and Sasha really fancy, and they're kind of hoping there's going to be some sort of foursome situation going on over the weekend. So there's this kind of sexually charged undertone. There's also a weird sexual thing going on between Jessie and Darcy as well, which is awkward because Jessie and Lou are best friends. Are you keeping up with this? Probably not. Like I said, this book is so strange, but it's just this really deep exploration, I suppose, of queer culture and queer identity, and what it means to be really deeply ingrained in queer culture, but maybe too ingrained. This book is so fundamentally queer, from every angle. It is so queer, and I think it might give a straight person an aneurysm. A straight person would not be able to understand what's going on here, at all. As I wrote in my notes on my iPad, because apparently I'm an iPad mum, I wrote, this book is sexy, erotic, it talks in depth about gender and sexuality and the intersection of that. It's a fascinating inspection of real butches and high femmes. It is so rare that you find a book that's actually written about like butches and like high femmes, and I love exploration of like butch and high femme relationships. It's so fascinating to me. It's a book written for queer people who are deeply interested or deeply involved in queer culture. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Like, I don't think I would necessarily describe it as a good book, but just a fascinating book. I think about it all the time. I couldn't not talk about Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. This is a queer classic, and I read it in April this year, and I just absolutely adored it. This book was written in the 1970s, and it does reflect that. Like, you can tell this book was written in the 1970s, where some things are written that probably wouldn't be written today, but that's what happens with classics sometimes. This book is very shocking at points. It covers a lot of things that were very taboo in the 1970s. It was published in 1973, and it was kind of one of the very first books that showed such an explicit portrayal of lesbianism. And you'd think that this would be very controversial for the 70s, that maybe it bombed at the time and has got popular in the years since. But no, this book was actually apparently really popular in the 1970s, and I can imagine it made some people like clutch their pearls. Our main character here is Molly Bolt, and I genuinely don't think there has ever been a book character that I have loved and adored as much as Molly Bolt. She is this fearless, super strong girl. You literally follow her from like childhood through to adulthood. And she just, like, from day one, does not care what anyone thinks of her. Like, she is brash and bold, and she just, like, she gives zero fucks. And she is, like, the kind of kid who would tell off other kids in the playground for, like, bullying somebody else, but, like, she wouldn't go about it in the best way. Like, she would beat them up in return, and she couldn't understand why it was wrong that she was doing that, because she was, like, protecting somebody else. Like, that is the kind of kid that Molly Bolt was. She's very much somebody who knows her own mind from a very early age, and she's, like, this inherently flawed person, but, like, aren't we all inherently flawed people? And Molly realizes when she is, like, young, like, I think it's in the 8th grade, that she likes girls. Like, she falls in love with her best friend Leotta, I think her best friend was called, if I remember correctly. And from there she's like, yeah, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I like girls. But also she's not afraid to, like, experiment with men as well. Like, she sleeps with multiple men throughout this book, but still holds on really strongly to her lesbian identity, which I thought was so interesting, because nowadays, like, lesbians and the whole community in general are so quick to be like, if you sleep with a man, you're clearly not a lesbian. But, like, sexuality is not as, like, easy as that. Like, some people can just, sex is sex. Like, I think for Molly, sex was sex. It didn't mean anything. She would use it as a means to an end. Like, if she needed something from a man, she would sleep with him. It was just the easy way of doing things. And it doesn't mean that she's not a lesbian. Like, is lesbianism inherently about sex? Is it about love? Is it about both? This is a very intense conversation that many lesbians have had and many lesbians have argued over, and I'm not going to give you my opinion, but, like, that is the kind of thing that this book covers. Being written in the 1970s, there are some things in this book that make you, as a 2024 reader, be like, that is so offensive and so bad. Like, Rita Mae Brown writes in this some pretty terrible things about, like, butch lesbians. She's very much like, why be a lesbian if you're going to be attracted to women who look like men, like that old thing. She, like, talks really derogatorily. Derogatory? How does one English? I literally don't. Derogatorily. I have no idea. My brain is just glitched. But she talks down on, like, butch lesbians, like, quite a lot in this book. Anyone who's, like, more mass presenting, she's like, no, like, quite openly disgusted by them. And it very much, like I said, it is of its time, but I still adored it. In writing my notes for this video, I was, like, just reading through some reviews on Goodreads just for some, like, inspiration, you know. And I saw one-star review that described this book as an anti-heterosexual manifesto. And honestly, yes, if that doesn't sell you this book, I don't know what will. Also, a part of this book is set in New York City, so Molly basically ends up in New York. She wants to become a filmmaker, and she just, like, immediately falls into the queer scene there. I adore, like, any book set in New York City, but especially in, like, the queer scene back in, like, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Like, I am all over that. So as soon as Molly, like, found herself in New York, I was like, yeah, this book is going to be one of my favourites of all time. And it is. The Falling in Love montage by Kira Smith. I think no matter how old I get, I am now 30 years old, I think I'm always going to be partial to a YA book, like particularly a queer YA book, because I just think it's so wonderful that there are so many YA young adult books being released nowadays that depict the queer experience. Because when I was a teenager, literally just 15 years ago, we didn't have this, and it's so wonderful that we have it now. I know I say it all the time, but it just like it fills my heart with joy. And I think there'll always be a part of me that just likes reading about queer teenagers and love. Like, that's just really special to me. And that is what this book is. So our main characters in this are Saoirse and Ruby. And Saoirse has quite a difficult home life. Her mum was described? No, her mum was diagnosed. Jesus Christ, what is with my brain today? Her mum was diagnosed with early onset dementia and has been sent to a care home. So Saoirse's like 16, 17 years old, if I remember correctly. And she's dealing with a lot. And she is like openly a lesbian, Saoirse, if I remember correctly. I don't think she's bisexual. I'm sure she's lesbian. I did read this like a year ago now, so I can't really remember the details. But with so much going on at home, Saoirse was just like very opposed to the idea of any sort of romantic relationship, very opposed to the idea of love. And then at a house party one day, she meets a girl called Ruby who has just moved in with her like family in Ireland for the summer because she's dealing with a lot of family stuff at home back in England. And they kind of meet, realise they've got this like ticking clock, and they both love rom-coms. They bond over their love of the classic rom-com. So they decide to spend the summer basically acting out every rom-com cliche, like going to the fun fair, like kissing in the rain and doing all these things. And it's perfect because like it means neither of them get feelings. They're doing all these fun things, but they know at the end of the day Ruby's going to go home and that's it. And Saoirse doesn't have to worry about falling in love. Only the problem with rom-coms is they always fall in love, and that is what this book is basically. I just think it was so cute. I love anything that Kira Smith writes. I really enjoyed Not My Problem as well, but I think I talked about Not My Problem in the original video that I made a couple of years ago. But yeah, this one, adorable. I was worried going into this one that it was going to be a bit like straight washed because rom-coms are inherently very straight. Like there are very few queer rom-coms. There are more coming out, don't get me wrong. It's a very straight genre generally, so I was worried it was going to be like a bit straight washed, and it wasn't really. There is a bit of the miscommunication trope in this book, and I hate miscommunication in a book. It just always feels so forced, like it never feels natural. So be warned, but despite that, I still adored this. This next recommendation might be a little bit off-piste because it's actually not a fiction book, it's a non-fiction book, and it's called Girls Can Kiss Now by Jill Gutowitz. I listened to the audiobook of this, and I've actually listened to it twice. I've listened to this book twice, which I've never done before with an audiobook. I just find myself like dipping in and out of the essays because I love this so much. Like if there was ever a collection of essays written specifically for me, like I'm pretty sure when Jill Gutowitz wrote this, she was thinking like, oh, Georgia from England will really like this. I loved it so much. So it basically opens by being like, this is a collection of essays about queerness in pop culture. It talks about Gala, it's going to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's going to talk about Glee, and I was like, yes, I'm hooked, I love it. And I did. I loved every single second of this, both times I listened to it. I am unashamed to say that I love pop culture. Like, I used to feel a lot of shame about it. Like, people have made me feel a lot of shame about my love of pop culture over the years. But now I'm 30 years old, I can say, like, no, this is just who I am at my core. I am a stan. I love pop culture. I love celebrities. I lap it up, okay? I always have done. From ever since I was like 11 years old, and I became obsessed with Girls Loud and then had a Girls Loud stan account on Twitter for many years of my life. That's a fun fact about me. Have I ever said that aloud on the internet before? Probably not. But I had a Girls Loud stan account on Twitter and then a Cheryl Cole stan account on Twitter. And yeah, this book felt like I was on FaceTime with a friend for like 10 hours, and I just absolutely adored it. If you are into your pop culture, if you're into queer pop culture specifically, this does talk about like anything queer that's happened in the media in the past like 15 years. This will talk about it in depth, and I was there through all of it. I feel like me and Jill Gutowitz could literally be besties. This book is very millennial cringe humour. Like there are certain bits where even me, like born and bred millennial 1994, there were points where I was like, oh, that is so painfully millennial, but also I am painfully millennial, and I enjoyed it. So if this sounds like something up your street, download the audiobook. I do want to get like the actual book so I can go through and like annotate it. But yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I have no doubt you're all sick of hearing me talk about this book now because I've mentioned this book so many times this year. I read it in like January as one of the first books I read in 2024 and it immediately became like my obsession. It was like my favourite book of the year for so long until it eventually got dethroned by another book that I'm going to talk about in a moment. There's just something about this book. I don't usually like supernatural things. I don't like horror. I don't like body horror. I love this. I wouldn't describe this as a horror, as a thriller, as a romance. This was just, what would I describe this as? Literary fiction, maybe? I don't really know, but it was unlike anything I've ever read in my entire life. So Miri and Leah are a married lesbian couple, and the fact that they are lesbians is very much a side point in this book. It's not really brought up. They just are a lesbian married couple and they happen to be the main characters in this book. And as much as I love reading books about queerness, that like specifically focus on queerness and on the sort of like life experiences that come along with that, I do also really appreciate a book that just treats queerness as normal, and that is very much what Our Wives Under the Sea does. So in this book, Leah is a marine scientist, a deep sea scientist. I can't really remember her job role, but she has to go on these like deep sea missions where she goes undersea in a submarine for weeks at a time, and that is just how their relationship is. Like Miri is very used to waiting on the land whilst Leah goes underneath and just waits for her to come back and they continue with their life. Only this time round, Leah has gone under the sea and she hasn't returned. And Miri is just waiting for her. She is trying to get in contact with Leah's company and they're giving her no details. And eventually she just has to come to terms with the fact that Leah's gone, like she's not coming back, and she has to go through that grieving process of losing her wife without actually having any answers. But then one day, with no explanation, Leah just comes back, like the submarine resurfaces and Leah's home, but she's not the Leah that Miri's always known. There is something like fundamental about her that has changed, and we're not just talking like psychologically, like she is literally slipping away in front of Miri's eyes. This book is so claustrophobic and so terrifying, but in like a really subtle way. It's horror, but like not in your face horror. It's just this like subtle sense of impending doom, like this foreboding, and it's just deeply uncomfortable. So yeah, this book is definitely queer, but it's not a love story, but also it does have these like random lines which are so incredibly beautiful about like Miri and Leah's love for each other. Let me find you one of these lines and read it out. The thing about Leah as I knew her was that every so often when I was pissed off and sitting on the sofa, she would grab my legs and start to pedal them, chanting Tour de France, until I laughed. The thing about Leah was that 9 times out of 10 she couldn't bring herself to be unkind about anyone, but then 3 times a year would say something so blisteringly cruel about someone we knew that she clapped both hands to her mouth and turned in a circle as though warding off evil. At a point, perhaps 6 months after we first started seeing each other, she read a book in which a pair of lesbians emailed each other meaningful lines of poetry, and shortly afterwards she asked if this was the sort of thing that we should be doing. If you ever send me poetry, I texted her, I'll cut your tits off. And over the course of the next week and a half, she emailed me every poem from the complete works of Wilfred Owen, signing off every email with a winking face and a heart. I don't know, I just think this book was so incredibly beautiful as well as being so incredibly horrifying. Okay, we're going to do it. We're going to talk about not only my favourite queer book of the year so far, but just my favourite book of the year so far, and that is Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. Oh my god, this book, there are no words. I'm going to find words. There are going to be many words, but like, there are no words. You get what I mean? So imagine if Good Luck Babe by Chapel Roan was in book form. Sunburn would be that book, like that idea of waking up in 20, 30, 40 years time and rolling over in bed and looking at your husband and realising that you minimised yourself, like you didn't live the queer life that you were supposed to live. That idea is this book. Lucy's a teenage girl living in a small village in Ireland who over the course of one long hot summer comes to realise that she is completely obsessed with, in love with, one of her friends called Susanna. And Susanna, it turns out, has similar feelings towards Lucy, only they are fundamentally very different people. And while Susanna is very willing to come out and live a queer life and accept who she is and like just she wants to explore that area of herself, Lucy isn't. Like Lucy is terrified and Lucy would much rather go under the radar and never admit who she truly is just to go along with what society wants. And their story kind of like reaches a crossroads in this book where Lucy's got to make a decision. She's got to decide whether she wants to live this queer life with Susanna, or if she wants to live a less scary life and just be straight, just do what society expects her to do. Like, does she choose her own happiness, or does she choose society's happiness? This book is an exploration of what it actually means to be queer when you're from a small town, when you've got all these expectations of you, when you're living a very religious lifestyle. And it just feels so incredibly real. Like, I was reading this book and I was relating each character to people, to characters that have popped up in my own life. And I was literally reading it like, one girl would say something to Lucy and I was like, oh, that is so similar to what this one girl said to me during school. Honestly, reading this book felt very cathartic. Like, I was quite badly bullied when I was in sixth form. I was called a lesbian on a daily basis. I was not out. People did not know I was lesbian. I didn't know I was a lesbian. Apparently everyone else did. And yeah, this book just felt so painfully relatable. This is inherently just a really, really sad book, but it's also just so real. But to really get across how incredible the writing is in this book, I feel like, again, I just need to read an excerpt of it and you can figure it out for yourself. I don't want to be a thing that the village isn't supposed to know about. How can I fix this? Do I want it fixed? I wouldn't want to live not knowing the goodness of Susanna. She is fresh air and warmth the mornings in July. What is there to fix? There is evil in my yearning, I know. I just can't see where yet. How could I be afraid? How could I be nervous with her? This is a moment of great peace when, for the first time, I'm not afraid of my feelings. I want her. I just want her. There isn't anything sordid about it. Actually, it's the most beautiful feeling I've ever known. A part of me wonders if I should stop bathing or wet myself at school or make my father cry, so that I have a real reason to feel ashamed. All I've done is fall for Susanna. It's not shameful or radical or wild. Anybody would fall for Susanna. I never meant to upset anybody. And my personal favourite line of this entire book. The sun is going down. I'm running out of time. Very soon I will have to decide whether I'm brave enough to be with her. To be with her is a sin. To be without her is a tragedy. Being a lesbian myself, who has never really had feelings for men, like I used to think I had feelings for men, in hindsight, I never really did. I don't know if straight women feel for men the same way that lesbians feel for each other, like that deep yearning. Does straight love feel the same as lesbian love? Like, I put it on such like this pedestal. Like, lesbian love to me feels so like beautiful and magical and just like, when I used to watch rom-coms as a kid, like I never got it because I was like, that isn't what love feels like. But like lesbian love, that is what that feels like to me. Like the fireworks, the tenderness, like the yearning. Oh, the lesbian yearning. I love lesbian yearning. But like, I just can't imagine ever feeling that way for a man. That's because I'm a lesbian. What am I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I have a point, but I don't know how to like get it out. All I know is that when my straight friends like describe a crush to me, it just feels like it pales in comparison to what like a lesbian crush feels like. But maybe I'm projecting because every time I ever had like a crush on a man, it just paled in comparison to like when I had crushes on women. I don't know. Let's talk about Chlorine by Jade Song. I honestly went into this book thinking that I wasn't going to like it. It was just a free book on Kindle in like July, I think. So I was like, oh, it's gay. I'll get it. I probably won't get around to reading it. And then one day it was all I had downloaded on my Kindle. So I started it. And oh my God, it was so good. Once again, this is a book that isn't really like centered around queerness, but queerness is like a running theme throughout it. Our main character here is a girl called Ren, and Ren is a girl with a lot of pressure on her shoulders. She is first generation Chinese American. Her parents are Chinese immigrants, and she has like a lot of pressure on her. She wants like her parents have given up a lot for her to like have a good life in America. And so she feels like she needs to give that back to them in return, and she needs to actually make her life a success. And Ren is a swimmer. She's a really, really good swimmer. So she sets her sights on getting a swimming scholarship to like one of the best universities in the country. And that is like, she is on a one-track mind. That is the only thing that matters in her life. And ever since being a young child, Ren has been really obsessed with the idea of mermaids. Like, that's why she wanted to learn to swim in the first place. And she's just like this incredible, incredible swimmer. Like, there's no doubt that she is going to go far with this, as not necessarily as a career, but like as a sport. Like, she is really, really good at it. Only as the pressure begins to mount for Ren, and we're not talking about just like the pressures of getting into this university and doing good at swimming and doing good at school, we're talking about like this is like a coming of age book where she's dealing with hormones and puberty and sexuality, and she's got all of this going on. She begins to turn into a mermaid. Or at least she thinks she's beginning to turn into a mermaid. It's not ever made entirely clear in this book if she actually is becoming a mermaid or if she is going through some sort of like mental break. This is a horror, like a body horror kind of book. So the answer's never really there. I suppose it's very much up to your own interpretation. I personally read this as if she was having some sort of like mental break and she actually wasn't becoming a mermaid, but maybe that's wrong. I don't really know. But alongside the whole mermaid storyline, there's also a very sort of like sweet and tender story about how Ren and her best friend are in love. And like her best friend is like quite obviously in love with Ren, like she is obsessed with her. And Ren, while she does seem to be in love with her best friend as well, like she does reciprocate those feelings, she's much more preoccupied with the whole like mermaidness of it all, like much more preoccupied with the swimming. And mermaids don't bother themselves with things like human emotion, even though she kind of wants to reciprocate those feelings, and I think she does in a way, but like she convinced herself that she can't because she's a mermaid and mermaids don't, if that makes sense. Those Who Wait by Haley Cass. This book is 600 pages long. I didn't know that when I downloaded it onto my Kindle, but it was, and you know what? I would read it if it was double that length. Like 1,200 pages, give it to me. I will read it. I will love it. I devoured this book. I was so sad when it was over. This is contemporary fiction. It's a lesbian romance novel, and it just hit all the right spots for me. Like this was just romance done so well. Our main characters here are Sutton and Charlotte. Sutton is a baby gay. She's only just sort of like begun to realize that she may be bisexual, and she's very scared to like dip her toe into the water. Like she just doesn't know how to approach women, how to approach her queerness. And her best friend, whose name completely escapes me, one day is like, listen, you're being a bit pathetic. I'm just going to download you a dating app and I'm going to set you up a profile and we're going to swipe. And almost immediately after setting up this profile, they come across the profile of a woman called Charlotte, and Sutton is like, oh my God, she's gorgeous. I'm terrified. What do I do? And so the best friend just swipes right and sends her a message. And Charlotte immediately is very intrigued by Sutton. And Charlotte is, and I say this with a lot of love and with absolutely no disdain at all, like in more of like a good for you, you go away. Charlotte's a slut. Like Charlotte is sleeping around, she's sleeping with everyone. She is very much just like a one night stand kind of girly, working her way around New York City. Again, this is set in New York City, so I'm biased because I love anything set in New York City. She's just slutting her way around town, and she is not interested in like a relationship at all because Charlotte is a politician. She's currently running for some sort of political role. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but she can't be an out lesbian and also be in politics. It's something in her long-term plan. She's like, oh yeah, like 20 years in the future, once I'm president of the United States, because her grandma was president, she wants to be president. She is like, then I'll come out and it'll all be fine. But like, I'm not at this point in my career, in my life, going to come out. It's going to ruin my career. So she is very much just like, I just want to slut around. I want to be a lesbian, but I don't want a relationship. Only she is very intrigued by Sutton, and so agrees to become Sutton's dating guru. Only, of course, we all know what happens. They end up falling for each other. The characters in this book just felt so incredibly well-rounded. Like, I feel like I could sit here and like do a presentation on each and every character. I can't remember the name of the best friend, but I could tell you a lot about her, like about who she is as a person. And I think that's always a sign of a really good book. And yeah, it was a long book, like it was 600 pages. So you would kind of maybe hope there was a lot of like character development in there, character explanations in there. I don't know what the word is I'm going for there. You would hope that in a 600-page book, but like it did it. It did it really well. There were literally points in this where I forgot that I wasn't reading about real people. Like that is how real they felt. And it makes me sad, like actively sad that Charlotte and Sutton don't exist because I wish they did. Their love is just so tender and beautiful, like once they actually get to that point. And yes, there is miscommunication in this book. Actually, very controversially, I think the miscommunication in this book was really well done. And I think it was actually very true to real life. My problem with miscommunication, because like it happens all the time in relationships, is that in books often feels very like forced and very fake. And you can just tell it's the author like trying to come up with some sort of like third act breakup to like keep the book going for a little bit longer. But in this book, the miscommunication they have and like the way that things get misconstrued just felt really right and real. And I was like, yeah, this could genuinely happen in real life. It just felt like a real relationship dealing with real problems, and I really enjoyed it. Also, this book is hella spicy, like so spicy. The sex scenes in this are so good, like some of the best I've ever read, in my personal opinion. Okay, 2 books left. I have a feeling this video is going to be so long. I'm sorry, I get started and I can't stop talking. But the next book I want to talk about is That Green-Eyed Girl by Julie Owen Moylan. I actually downloaded this on Kindle in the same month that I downloaded for free Chlorine. It was a really good free book on Kindle month for me. That Green-Eyed Girl is lesbian historical fiction set in New York City in the 1950s and the 1970s. Like, sorry, was this book made for me? I think so. I am not hearing enough people talking about this book, and that needs to change immediately. I'm telling you, like, it needs to change so soon. Read this book. So this is a dual timeline, like I said, set in the 1950s and the 1970s. In 1955, we have a lesbian couple, Dovey and Gillian, and they are school teachers and they live together, and obviously they're having to live together under the guise like they're just roommates, they're just lodgers, like it's all good, only they are in a relationship, and they are very happily in a relationship when they are in their apartment on their own and the curtains are drawn. And they're just like really, really happy together. Only the moment they step outside of their apartment, like they can't be queer in any way. Like if anybody out there in the real world was to find out they were a lesbian couple, their entire lives would be ruined. Like they would lose their jobs, they would become outcasts. Like it was a really dangerous time to be queer. Only of course, one of their colleagues, a very, very nosy woman, finds out that they are a couple, and so she starts blackmailing Dovey. Dovey seems to be much more secure in her sexuality than Gillian. Gillian's kind of like always had one foot out of the door, and so Dovey kind of goes above and beyond as a very big people pleaser to try and keep this secret from Gillian. So she lets the other person move into their apartment, and things just start to go downhill really, really quickly. So that's happening in the 1950s. In the 1970s, 1975, 20 years on, Ava is a teenager. I think she's like 16 years old, and she is dealing with a lot of stuff at home. Her father's left. Her mother is very, very mentally unstable. She's going through some sort of mental break, and she's kind of dealing with it all on her own. And then one day a parcel turns up addressed to just apartment 3B, and she lives in the same apartment that Dovey and Gillian had lived in 20 years beforehand. And in this parcel, she finds all of these sort of like little clues as to like a sneak peek into someone's life. And we know as the reader that it's Dovey and Gillian's life, only Ava doesn't know that. So she goes on a mission to find out who this woman was or who these women were, and to try and get the parcel to the rightful person. And she very much becomes like obsessed with this task of hers as kind of like a distraction from what's going on with her mother. This book really beautifully sort of covers what it was like to be queer in the 1950s, and then what it was like to deal with like mental health in the 1970s. I just thought this was so well written. I just really, really adored it. Oh, and the way that these two stories kind of like intertwine at points, it literally had me like audibly gasping. It was just a masterclass in writing, in my personal opinion. And we are on to our very last book. I have no doubt you've all heard me talk about this one before, but I couldn't not mention it. I didn't mention it in my last top 10 WLW books video, so I've got to mention it in this one. This is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes, another YA book, and this may well be my favourite YA book like I've ever read. I adore this. 16-year-old Yami is a Mexican-American girl who's recently joined her local Catholic school after being outed at her old school. Like, she was outed to like people at the school, to her friends, but like luckily her mum never really caught wind of it, so she's kind of like was out but like not out, if that makes sense. And she has gone to this Catholic school not because of being outed, but because her younger brother is going through some stuff, and I think he got expelled from his last school, so they've both now been sent to this Catholic school, and like she's got a lot of responsibility on her shoulders to kind of like look after her brother, but also like protect herself as well, because she has decided that she is not going to be outed at this new school. Like, she is going to be the straightest of the straights. Like, there is no way she's going to be outed, only of course she joins this new school and immediately becomes obsessed with this girl called Bo, and it gets quite difficult to stay in the closet. Like, that's kind of like the main story of this book, but it's so much more than that. It talks about the pain of immigration after Yami's father was deported. She's trying to keep up this like long distance relationship with her father. It talks about colonialism and racism and homophobia and mental health, and it covers all of these things so beautifully, and it never feels like box checking. That is a problem I do have with a lot of YA books, because don't get me wrong, I think it is wonderful to have representation in books, but I think a lot of the time YA books kind of fall into the trap of like ticking boxes. Like, I need to talk about all these different things, so I need to squeeze in as much representation as I possibly can, that they start to feel not realistic and not real life. Whereas this book, it does talk about so many important topics, and it explores so many different sexualities and talks about gender stuff, but it never feels like a box checking exercise. Like, it feels real, and it was so beautiful. So there you go. I know this video has probably been a very, very long one. I'm so sorry. It was meant to be just like a quick sit down and chat about some books, and I've literally been talking for like an hour and a half, so I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite WLW books are. I want to hear them all. Thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. I am trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by Christmas. I do think it's doable, but it's not doable without your help. So if you've watched all of this video and you like this, then why not subscribe? I talk about queer books, mostly sapphic books, but just generally queer books. I have big goals to talk about like other queer things generally. I want to do more like lifestyle stuff. So yeah, stick around. Why don't you join us, and we'll see what I'm going to do next. Who knows? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.